Why is Sleeps with Angels not just one of Neil Young's best albums of the 90s, but arguably a defining work of that decade? In this video, I'm going to argue that the 90s were pivotal for Neil Young, a period where he didn't just revive his career, he redefined it. We'll explore how the grunge movement, which drew heavily from Young's own legacy, played a crucial role in his resurgence. I'll also delve into the haunting connection between this album and Kurt Cobain's tragic death, showing how Young's ability to write dark, atmospheric songs reached new heights on Sleeps with Angels. The 90s weren't just another decade for Neil Young, they were a rebirth. After a period of commercial and critical inconsistency in the 80s, Young found himself suddenly embraced by a new generation of artists who saw him as the godfather of grunge. Bands like Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and Soundgarden not only idolized Young, they actively collaborated with him, and in turn, it made his career more relevant. This wasn't just a comeback, it was a rejuvenation. This was a genre that took Young's raw, unfiltered approach and it made it their own. Sleeps with Angels is Young's 22nd studio album. It was released on August 16, 1994 on Reprise Records. It's now celebrating 30 years. This is also his 7th album with Crazy Horse. The album was co-produced by his longtime producer David Briggs, who died the following year. But first, a little background. The early 90s were somewhat of a comeback for Neil Young. In other words, this was his second act. It all began in 1989 when he released Freedom. This album had the song Rocking in the Free World and many others. He would then perform this song and others on Saturday Night Live, helping put him in the spotlight again. A year later, he released Ragged Glory in 1990 with the band Crazy Horse. This had a garage rock and grunge sound, and that was even like a year before grunge exploded, but Rolling Stone magazine ranked it 36 of the best grunge albums of all time. After that, in 1992, he went back to his roots and country rock origins with Harvest Moon. He even performed Rocking in the Free World on the 1993 MTV VMAs with Pearl Jam, in addition to recording an Unplugged album as part of the MTV series Unplugged. And that brings us to 1994, where he decides to write a darker album, Sleeps with Angels, who many fans have compared to one of his previous albums called Tonight's the Night. That was released back in 1975. So why is this one of his best albums of the 90s? The first reason is the title track. The song was written as a tribute to Kurt Cobain. It's a short song. It's under 3 minutes long, but it's one of the most important songs on the album. The song had a very distinct guitar tone. It was almost as if the band Crazy Horse was trying to match the grunge tone used by Nirvana. The song begins with a line, "She wasn't perfect, she had some trips of her own." So we can assume he's talking about Courtney Love. Then the song goes, "At least he wasn't alone, too late, he sleeps with angels, too soon," which shows he was gone too soon. Neil Young was also affected by his death after Kurt Cobain quoted a Neil Young song in the note he left before his death. The quote was, "It's better to burn out than fade away," from the Neil Young song, "Hey, Hey, My, Into the Black." Neil Young also felt like he could have done something to prevent Kurt's death. Neil Young made a few attempts to contact Kurt Cobain and wanted to tell him that he should only play music when he felt like it. Therefore, Neil Young felt that maybe he could have helped prevent Kurt from dying. Another key reason Sleeps with Angels stands out is its deeply atmospheric and somber tone, which sets it apart from Neil Young's earlier work. While albums like Ragged Glory delivered hard-hitting, rock-driven energy, Sleeps with Angels dives into a darker, more emotional territory. This isn't just a shift in mood, it's a deliberate and profound exploration of grief, loss, and reflection that resonates far more deeply than the raw power of his more rockier albums, let's just say it. This tonal shift shows Young's ability to adapt and push his music into new, more introspective realms, making Sleeps with Angels a far more compelling and resonant experience. Another reason is his songwriting and musicianship. The album features some of his most poetic and poignant songwriting, such as the epic 14-minute Change Your Mind, which shows his mastery of dark guitar textures and raw emotional vulnerability. I like the song a lot. It has that very distinctive grungy guitar tone that the band Crazy Horse has been using for over 50 years. The song has a very deep message as well. It's about how you must live in a world that's beyond your control. The song also features some beautiful vocal harmonies in the chorus, making it a memorable song. Another great song that shows off the songwriting and musicianship is Prime of Life. This one is Neil Young playing the flute, who is probably the only musician other than Ian Anderson that I will listen to play the flute in rock music. The song also has Frank Poncho and Pedro playing some grungy guitar riffs, and that helps add a rocking tone to the song. This is also supposedly the first song that they wrote, and Neil Young appears to be in more of a reflective mood. The song has a nice groove and interesting guitar tones. Another reason why this is one of the best albums of the 90s is that it is a continuation of Young's 90s comeback. Sleeps with Angels came during the creative peak for Neil Young in the early 90s, following the acclaimed albums Freedom, Ragged Glory, and Harvest Moon. The album cemented Young's status as the godfather of grunge and demonstrated his continued artistic relevance and influence. One example of this is the song Drive By. There's something about the song that sounds very 90s. I can imagine any of the big grunge bands doing a cover of this during one of their unplugged shows. I believe the song is about someone that Neil Young knew that was killed in a drive-by shooting. Another one with a very 90s sound is Safeway Cart. This one reminds me of the tone of Pearl Jam's 10 album. It has that slow and moody rhythm, and it just captures that mood that many bands did in the 90s. Then there was a song Trans Am that has a tone that evokes both the singer-songwriter side of Neil Young with some of those grungy tones that are used on the album. Not everything here is super serious though. There's one song which is probably the hardest rocker, and it's called Piece of Crap. And it's just a very fun and upbeat jam where Neil and his bandmates are saying how things are no longer built to last. It's a fun garage rock type of song, and it takes the listener away from the sadness of many of the other songs. The last reason I have to why it's one of his best is that it's a timeless and influential album. Over 25 years later, Sleeps with Angels is still held in high regard. It's been cited as a major influence on other artists and is considered a high point in Young's career. The album's poetic lyrics, atmospheric sound, and emotional resonance have ensured its status as a 90s rock classic. This album takes me back to the first album I ever bought by Neil Young, which was not this one, it was Harvest, and I bought it sometime before this one came out. At that time, I was listening to a lot of metal, a lot of grunge, and I used to listen to Harvest on repeat. And that album, Harvest, was from 1972, but later I went out and I got this album, and it's been one of my favorites. So I would say Harvest is my favorite Neil Young album of the 70s. The 80s I kind of skipped. But then my favorite of the 90s is Sleeps with Angels. So that is all. Let me know in the comments. What do you think of this album, Sleeps with Angels? Is it his best album of the 90s, or do you prefer a different one? Check out my review of Harvest. Now that I mentioned it, I did that 2 years ago for its 50th anniversary. Thanks for watching. Please like this video. It helps me with the YouTube algorithm. Please subscribe if you're not already. I do rock and metal reviews, rankings, and more. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.